In the shadow-draped chambers of the Palazzo Vecchio, where power breathed through stone walls like a living entity, a truth emerged that would reshape the understanding of human dominance for centuries to come. The year was 1513, and Niccolò Machiavelli, exiled from the political theater he had served with unwavering dedication, began to decode the fundamental laws that governed the rise and fall of men and nations. The first law, whispered through the corridors of history, was deceptively simple: say nothing. Yet in its simplicity lay the most profound complexity of human interaction. For in a world where every word could be a weapon, every confession a potential downfall, and every revelation a gift to one's enemies, silence became the ultimate fortress. Machiavelli had witnessed the destruction of countless political figures who believed that eloquence equaled power, that the ability to speak beautifully meant the ability to rule effectively. He watched as they opened their mouths and revealed their strategies, their fears, their weaknesses, and their ambitions to a world that waited hungrily for such intelligence. These men, brilliant in many ways, fell not because they lacked intelligence or courage, but because they failed to understand that in the game of power, information was the most precious currency, and those who spent it freely would inevitably find themselves bankrupt. The Duke of Valentinois, Cesare Borgia, understood this principle with an intuition that bordered on the supernatural. When Machiavelli first encountered him, he was struck not by the Duke's eloquence or his philosophical discourse, but by his calculated reticence. Borgia spoke only when speech served a purpose, revealed only what would advance his position, and maintained a silence so profound that his enemies were forced to guess at his intentions until it was too late to counter them. In the courts of Florence, Machiavelli observed how the most successful power players were often those who seemed to say the least. They attended every meeting, participated in every discussion, but their contributions were measured, strategic, and designed to gather information rather than dispense it. They asked questions that revealed the thoughts of others while revealing nothing of their own. They nodded at the right moments, frowned with concern when appropriate, but their true thoughts remained locked behind eyes that revealed nothing. This was not mere taciturnity or social awkwardness. This was the weaponization of silence, the transformation of restraint into strength. For when a man reveals nothing of his true intentions, his enemies cannot anticipate his moves. When he keeps his counsel, his allies cannot betray his secrets. When he speaks only when necessary, his words carry the weight of rarity and command attention through their very scarcity. The psychology of silence in power dynamics operates on multiple levels. On the surface, it creates an aura of mystery that humans are psychologically compelled to fill with their own projections and assumptions. A silent leader becomes a blank canvas upon which others paint their hopes, fears, and expectations. This psychological phenomenon grants the silent one enormous power, as they become all things to all people while committing to nothing. Deeper still, silence serves as a form of psychological warfare. In negotiations, the one who speaks first often reveals their position and loses advantage. In conflicts, the one who explains themselves first appears defensive. In alliances, the one who reveals their needs first becomes dependent. Silence, therefore, becomes a tool of dominance, forcing others to reveal their hands while keeping one's own cards hidden. But, perhaps most importantly, silence creates space for observation and analysis. While others chatter and posture and reveal themselves, the silent observer gathers intelligence. They note who speaks to whom, who defers to whom, who fears whom, and who desires what. They map the invisible networks of influence and obligation that truly govern any organization or society. They identify the pressure points, the weak links, and the opportunities that their more vocal competitors miss because they are too busy listening to their own voices. The merchant princes of Venice understood this principle intuitively. In their dealings with foreign dignitaries, they employed what they called the courtesy of silence, a practice of allowing their guests to speak first, to reveal their desires and limitations before any negotiation truly began. By the time the Venetian spoke, he possessed a complete understanding of his counterpart's position, while his own remained mysterious. This asymmetry of information translated directly into asymmetry of power. Yet silence must be distinguished from mere passivity. The silence of power is active, intentional, and strategic. It is the silence of a predator in wait, not the silence of prey in hiding. It is chosen, not imposed, and it serves specific purposes that advance one's position in the complex game of human dynamics. The weak interpret silence as absence of ideas, of courage, of engagement. The powerful understand silence as presence, the presence of control, of intelligence, of strength. When a truly powerful individual enters a room and says nothing, their very presence shifts the energy. Others unconsciously adjust their behavior, moderate their statements, and seek approval from the silent figure. This is power in its purest form, the ability to influence without action, to lead without words, to dominate without aggression. In the digital age, this principle has only grown more relevant. In a world where every thought can be broadcast, every opinion can be recorded, and every statement can be preserved and weaponized, the discipline of silence becomes even more critical. Those who flood social platforms with their every thought, who respond to every provocation, who feel compelled to have an opinion on every issue, reveal not their engagement but their lack of strategic thinking. The truly powerful in the modern era understand that their silence has more impact than their words. When they finally speak, the rarity of their voice grants it weight. When they choose not to respond to attacks, their silence often proves more damaging to their attackers than any defense could have been. When they refuse to engage with controversies, they force others to fight shadow battles while preserving their own energy for more important conflicts. This is not to suggest that powerful individuals never speak. Rather, they understand that every word must serve a purpose, that every statement must advance their position, and that silence is always an option. They speak to inspire when inspiration serves their goals, to intimidate when intimidation is useful, to inform when information asymmetry benefits them, and to misdirect when misdirection creates advantage. The architecture of silence, therefore, becomes the foundation upon which all other power strategies must be built. Without the ability to control one's own voice, to choose when to speak and when to remain silent, all other tactics become vulnerable to exposure and counterattack. The man who cannot hold his tongue cannot hold his power, for in revealing himself prematurely, he grants his enemies the very weapons they need to destroy him. Part 2, The Mathematics of Preparation. If silence forms the foundation of power, then preparation constitutes its architecture. Plan everything. This was not mere advice from Machiavelli but a fundamental law of survival in the ruthless ecosystem of human ambition. For in the grand theater of power, those who improvise inevitably find themselves dancing to music composed by their more prepared adversaries. The second pillar of Machiavellian power reveals itself not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the countless hours of invisible preparation that precede every significant action. True power is never spontaneous. It is the culmination of meticulous planning, careful analysis, and strategic positioning that often spans years or even decades. In the war rooms of Renaissance Italy, Machiavelli witnessed the difference between leaders who planned and those who merely reacted. The planners studied maps for months before battles, analyzed the psychological profiles of their enemies, calculated supply lines and weather patterns, and prepared contingencies for every possible outcome. The reactors, no matter how brave or charismatic, found themselves responding to situations created by their more strategic opponents, fighting battles on grounds chosen by their enemies, according to timetables that favored their adversaries. The Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, exemplified this principle in his rise to power. Years before he made his move against his nephew, the rightful Duke, Ludovico had been quietly mapping the political landscape, identifying potential allies and enemies, understanding the economic pressures that drove various factions, and calculating the precise moment when conditions would favor his coup. When he finally acted, his success seemed effortless because the groundwork had been so thoroughly laid. His enemies found themselves responding to a situation that had been crafted to ensure their defeat. Planning, in the Machiavellian sense, operates on multiple dimensions simultaneously. There is tactical planning, the immediate steps required to achieve a specific goal. There is strategic planning, the longer-term positioning that creates sustainable advantage. And there is contingency planning, the preparation for unexpected developments that could derail even the most carefully laid schemes. Tactical planning focuses on the mechanics of execution. It answers the questions of how, when, and where. It involves understanding the specific steps required to move from current position to desired outcome, identifying the resources necessary for each step, and calculating the timing that maximizes the probability of success. The tactically prepared leader knows not only what they want to achieve but exactly how they intend to achieve it. Strategic planning, however, operates at a higher level. It focuses on positioning rather than immediate action, on creating conditions that make victory inevitable rather than fighting for victory directly. The strategically prepared leader understands that the most important battles are won before they are fought, through the careful arrangement of circumstances that leave opponents with no good options. Consider the approach of Cardinal Rodrigo Borgia in his campaign to become Pope Alexander VI. His strategic planning began decades before the papal election, as he systematically built relationships with other cardinals, accumulated wealth and influence, and positioned himself as the candidate who could best serve various factions' interests. By the time the conclave met, the outcome had been determined not by the eloquence of his speeches during the election but by the careful cultivation of support over many years. Contingency planning, the third dimension, acknowledges that no plan, however carefully constructed, survives contact with reality unchanged. The prepared leader therefore develops multiple scenarios, alternative approaches, and fallback positions. They understand that flexibility within a framework of preparation is far superior to either rigid adherence to a single plan or complete improvisation. The mathematical aspect of preparation reveals itself in the careful calculation of probabilities, resources, and timing. Successful power players become masters of what might be called political mathematics, the ability to quantify intangible factors like loyalty, fear, ambition, and desperation, and to incorporate these calculations into their strategic planning. They understand, for instance, that loyalty has a price, and that price varies based on circumstances. An ally who demands little in favorable conditions may require significant investment to maintain their support when pressures mount. They calculate not only the cost of maintaining alliances but the cost of their deterioration, planning their resource allocation accordingly. They also understand the mathematics of timing. Every action creates reactions, and these reactions unfold according to predictable patterns. The prepared leader studies these patterns, understanding how long it takes for news to travel, for opposition to organize, for economic pressures to manifest, and for political coalitions to form or dissolve. This temporal intelligence allows them to time their moves for maximum impact and minimum resistance. The preparation of intelligence networks represents perhaps the most crucial aspect of comprehensive planning. Information asymmetry, knowing what others do not know, or knowing it sooner, provides decisive advantage in almost every conflict. The prepared leader therefore invests heavily in systems that gather, analyze, and act upon information faster and more effectively than their competitors. This involves not only formal intelligence gathering but the cultivation of what might be called social sensors, individuals throughout the organization or society who, whether knowingly or unknowingly, provide information about developing situations. These networks must be carefully maintained, with each source understanding their value to the leader while remaining unaware of the full scope of the intelligence operation of which they are a part. The prepared leader also understands the importance of controlling the flow of information. They plan not only what they need to know but what others should not know, creating systems that protect their own intelligence while potentially feeding misinformation to their opponents. This aspect of preparation transforms information itself into a weapon, allowing the prepared to shape their enemy's understanding of reality in ways that serve their strategic objectives. Resource planning extends beyond the obvious elements of money and manpower to include less tangible but equally important assets: credibility, goodwill, fear, and respect. The prepared leader budgets these resources as carefully as they budget financial ones, understanding that credibility spent unwisely cannot be easily recovered, that goodwill has limits that must be respected, and that fear and respect must be carefully calibrated to maintain their effectiveness. Perhaps most importantly, comprehensive preparation includes the deliberate cultivation of one's own capabilities. The prepared leader engages in constant self-development, understanding that personal weaknesses become organizational vulnerabilities and that individual strengths multiply organizational advantages. They study not only their external environment but their own psychological patterns, emotional triggers, and decision-making tendencies, working to optimize their own performance as the central component of their power system. This self-preparation extends to the development of what might be called executive presence, the ability to project confidence, competence, and control even in uncertain or threatening situations. The prepared leader practices maintaining composure under pressure, delivering bad news with authority, making difficult decisions quickly, and inspiring confidence in others even when they themselves may feel uncertain. The mathematics of preparation also reveals the compound nature of strategic advantage. Small preparations, maintained consistently over time, create enormous cumulative advantages. The leader who spends 15 minutes each day studying potential competitors, reading industry analysis, or cultivating relationships with key stakeholders gains, over years, an overwhelming intelligence advantage over those who rely on natural talent or periodic intensive efforts. This compound effect explains why truly powerful individuals often seem to possess almost supernatural knowledge and capability. They have not been blessed with superhuman abilities, they have simply maintained superior preparation disciplines over extended periods, allowing them to accumulate advantages that eventually become decisive. In the modern context, the principles of comprehensive preparation have only become more relevant. The pace of change has accelerated, making the ability to anticipate and prepare for developments even more crucial. The complexity of interconnected systems has increased, making systematic analysis more important than intuition alone. The availability of information has exploded, making the ability to synthesize and act upon intelligence a key differentiator. The unprepared modern leader, no matter how intelligent or charismatic, finds themselves constantly responding to crises that their more prepared competitors have anticipated and positioned themselves to exploit. They fight today's battles with yesterday's strategies, using outdated intelligence to make decisions about tomorrow's challenges. The prepared modern leader, by contrast, shapes the environment in which others must operate. They identify trends before they become obvious, position themselves advantageously before competition intensifies, and accumulate resources before scarcity develops. When crises emerge, they are ready not merely to survive but to expand their influence while others struggle to adapt. Part 3, The Precision of Decisive Action. The final principle in Machiavelli's Trinity of Power, strike once, represents the culmination of silence and preparation in a single, devastating moment of action. This is not the impulsive striking of the angry or the desperate flailing of the weak, but the surgical precision of the apex predator who has waited, watched, and prepared until the perfect moment presents itself. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, for he has already conquered the most dangerous enemy he will ever face, his own limitations, fears, and self-destructive impulses. This internal victory becomes the foundation for external dominance, as the individual who has mastered himself possesses the clarity, discipline, and resolve necessary to execute devastating strategies against those who remain enslaved by their own weaknesses. In the blood-soaked politics of Renaissance Italy, Machiavelli observed that power rarely changed hands through gradual transition or democratic process. Instead, it shifted through moments of decisive action, carefully planned strikes that completely altered the balance of forces in a single move. These were not random acts of violence or impulsive power grabs, but the inevitable result of extensive preparation meeting perfect opportunity. The concept of striking once speaks to both efficiency and finality. Efficient because a single, well-planned action achieves what multiple smaller actions could not. Final because it eliminates the possibility of counterattack or recovery by one's enemies. When true power strikes, it strikes to end the conflict permanently, not to wound or warn or negotiate. Cesare Borgia's conquest of Romagna exemplified this principle with terrible clarity. Rather than engaging in the traditional pattern of siege, negotiation, temporary truce, and renewed conflict that characterized most territorial disputes, Borgia planned a single campaign that would eliminate all significant opposition permanently. He studied each target, identified their vulnerabilities, corrupted their allies, and then struck with such overwhelming force and coordination that resistance became impossible. His enemies found themselves facing not a series of battles they might hope to win or lose individually, but a single, overwhelming assault that ended their power forever. The psychology of the decisive strike operates on multiple levels. On the immediate level, it creates shock and paralysis in one's enemies. The human mind, when confronted with sudden, overwhelming change, often freezes rather than adapts quickly. This psychological paralysis grants the striker precious time to consolidate their gains before effective resistance can be organized. On a deeper level, the decisive strike demonstrates to both allies and enemies that this is not an opponent to be trifled with. It establishes a reputation for effectiveness and ruthlessness that makes future conflicts less likely, as potential opponents calculate the cost of challenging someone capable of such devastating action. This reputational effect means that a single decisive strike can prevent dozens of future conflicts, making it ultimately more peaceful than a series of smaller, less conclusive actions. The preparation required for a truly decisive strike often takes years to develop properly. Unlike the impulsive violence of the desperate or the theatrical aggression of the insecure, the decisive strike emerges from deep understanding of one's enemy's position, capabilities, and psychology. It requires patience to wait for the optimal moment, discipline to resist the temptation of premature action, and wisdom to recognize when conditions have aligned for maximum impact. Intelligence gathering becomes crucial in this phase. The striker must understand not only their target's obvious strengths and weaknesses but the hidden dependencies, secret alliances, and psychological vulnerabilities that will determine the outcome of decisive action. They must map the entire ecosystem of relationships and interests surrounding their target, understanding how each element will respond to sudden change and how these responses can be anticipated and managed. Resource allocation for the decisive strike follows different principles than resource management for sustained campaigns. Instead of preserving resources for long-term attrition, the striker concentrates maximum force at the critical point and moment. This requires the courage to commit fully, understanding that half measures in decisive moments usually result in complete failure. The timing of the decisive strike often determines its success or failure. Strike too early, and the target may survive and adapt. Strike too late, and the window of opportunity may close. The master of decisive action develops an almost intuitive understanding of timing, recognizing the subtle signs that indicate when their enemy is most vulnerable and when their own position is strongest. This temporal intelligence involves understanding both immediate tactical timing and broader strategic timing. On the tactical level, it might mean recognizing the moment when an opponent's attention is divided, their resources are committed elsewhere, or their allies are distracted. On the strategic level, it might mean understanding when broader social, economic, or political conditions favor dramatic change and when they support the status quo. The execution of the decisive strike itself requires absolute commitment and the elimination of self-doubt. This is where the destruction of one's weak self becomes most critical. The weak self hesitates, second-guesses, and seeks approval. The weak self fears failure, criticism, and responsibility. The weak self wants guarantees and safety nets. But decisive action requires the acceptance of risk, the embrace of responsibility, and the commitment to follow through regardless of consequences. The strong self that emerges from this internal destruction possesses several crucial characteristics. It maintains clarity under pressure, seeing situations as they are rather than as they wish them to be. It accepts full responsibility for outcomes, neither blaming others for failures nor requiring external validation for successes. It maintains focus on objectives rather than becoming distracted by tactics, emotions, or social pressures. Most importantly, the strong self understands that power is not a possession to be held but a force to be exercised. Many individuals who accumulate the capability for decisive action fail to use it because they have not destroyed the weak self that seeks security and approval over effectiveness and results. They become powerful in potential but weak in practice, possessing the tools of dominance but lacking the internal resolve to employ them when necessary. The aftermath of decisive action often determines its ultimate value. The striker must be prepared not only to execute their plan but to consolidate their gains rapidly and completely. This involves having systems in place to assume control immediately, to neutralize remaining opposition before it can organize, and to establish new structures that make reversal of their victory impossible. This consolidation phase often proves more challenging than the initial strike, as it requires transitioning from the destruction of the old order to the construction of a new one. The skills required for decisive action, patience, planning, and surgical precision, must be complemented by the skills required for governance, administration, diplomacy, and institution building. The psychological transformation that enables decisive action also affects one's relationships with others. Those who have destroyed their weak selves and proven capable of devastating action inspire both respect and fear in others. This combination can be extremely useful for maintaining power, as people prefer to ally with the strong rather than challenge them, but it also creates isolation, as few people are comfortable with truly decisive individuals. This isolation is often the price of ultimate effectiveness. The man who has destroyed his weak self and proven capable of decisive action often finds that others relate to him differently. They seek his approval more eagerly, challenge him less directly, and maintain a psychological distance even in apparently close relationships. This can be lonely, but it is also powerful, as it grants the decisive individual space to think, plan, and act without constant social pressure and interference. In the modern context, the principle of decisive action has evolved but not diminished in importance. The tools of power may have changed, but the fundamental dynamics remain consistent. Modern decisive action might involve launching a new business that disrupts an entire industry, executing a hostile takeover that eliminates competition, or implementing organizational changes that completely alter a company's culture and capabilities. The same principles apply: extensive preparation, perfect timing, overwhelming force, and absolute commitment. The modern practitioner of decisive action understands that in a world of instant communication and rapid change, the window for decisive moves is often smaller, but the impact can be even greater than in previous eras. The digital age has also created new vulnerabilities that decisive actors can exploit. Reputations can be destroyed instantly through coordinated information campaigns. Market positions can be overturned through technological innovation. Social movements can be redirected through strategic influence operations. Those who understand how to identify and exploit these modern vulnerabilities can achieve decisive results that would have been impossible in earlier eras. However, the fundamental requirement remains unchanged: the destruction of one's weak self and the development of the internal resolve necessary for decisive action. No amount of planning, no quality of intelligence, no sophistication of tools can substitute for the psychological transformation that enables an individual to commit fully to decisive action when the moment arrives. The weak self always finds excuses to delay, to seek more information, to test the waters gradually, to hedge bets and preserve retreat options. These tendencies, while sometimes prudent in small matters, become fatal flaws when decisive action is required. The individual who cannot overcome these internal limitations will never achieve true power, regardless of their other capabilities. The strong self, forged through the deliberate destruction of weakness and limitation, understands that decisive moments demand decisive action. It accepts that perfect information is impossible, that guarantees are illusions, and that power belongs to those willing to act decisively when opportunity presents itself. This acceptance transforms the individual from a reactor to an actor, from someone to whom things happen to someone who makes things happen. Thus, the trinity of Machiavellian power, silence, preparation, and decisive action culminates in the creation of individuals who have transcended their own limitations and become capable of shaping the world according to their will. They say nothing until it serves their purpose, plan everything until they understand their environment completely, and strike once with such precision and force that the outcome is never in doubt. These individuals become the architects of history, the movers of mountains, the creators of new realities. They understand that power is not granted by others but seized by those strong enough to take it and wise enough to use it effectively. They know that the weak will always be ruled by the strong, and they have chosen which category they will occupy. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others because he has already survived the most dangerous battle he will ever fight, the battle against his own limitations, fears, and self-imposed restrictions. Having won this internal war, external victories become not just possible but inevitable. For when a human being achieves true internal mastery and combines it with strategic wisdom, they become a force of nature, unstoppable and undeniable in their pursuit of power and their achievement of dominance. In this lies the ultimate secret of Machiavellian power. It is not technique but transformation, not strategy but strength, not cleverness but character that determines who will rule and who will be ruled. Those who understand this truth and possess the courage to act upon it will find themselves among the select few who shape the destiny of nations and the course of human events. Those who do not will remain forever subject to the will of their superiors, wondering what separates the powerful from the powerless, never realizing that the answer lies not in their circumstances but in themselves. In the end, the game of power rewards not the loudest voice or the most elaborate plan or the most frequent action, but the individual who has achieved perfect integration of silence, preparation, and decisiveness. Such individuals become the silent architects of destiny, the patient composers of history, the decisive shapers of reality itself. They understand that true power is not a position to be held but a force to be embodied, not a title to be inherited but a capability to be developed, not a gift to be received but a strength to be forged through the deliberate destruction of everything weak within themselves and the systematic cultivation of everything strong.